Hey guys, it's David from 3D Make It, and today we're going to be talking about arc welding. What it is, how to get it, and why you should probably use it. Let's go. So let's start with what is arc welding? Well, arc welding is a plugin right now for Octoprint or Cura that I've been able to find that will take your 3D print G code and merge the G0, G1 moves into G2, G3 moves. So what's the big deal? What does that even mean? Well, let me show you. We're going to go to a low-tech piece of paper. So to start with, we need to define an arc. Well, an arc is simple. An arc is a segment of either a section of a curve or a circle. So when you look at a circle, if we take a circle and we cut it in half and take this bottom part here, that, my friends, is an arc. So if we look at this, this is an arc. An arc can also be a section of a parabola. So when you have an ellipse or something of that nature, and then you section it off, we can take the section we have off, and that is also an arc. So arcs can be symmetrical in that they could form a circle at the end, or they can be kind of off kilter, and in which case they would form an ellipsis or a parabolic curve. But regardless, arcs can be defined as taking a section of either a circle, parabola, or an ellipse, and we can get an arc. So let's turn the page, literally. So when we usually get a 3D print, the files that are created from the slicer use move commands either G0 or G1, and that gives us straight segmented lines. So for example, if we look here, I'm just drawing a few segments of some straight lines, or as rather straight my hand can draw, and eventually I can circle back with straight lines and get segments that semi-match. What Arc Welder does is it converts these straight lines into a curve. So if we start at point A and we want to get to point B in our slicer, this is what we're doing right now. And this causes extrusion start, stop, and lots of stutter movement. So it's not the smoothest way to actually get a good print. So if we start at point A, and again I want to get to point B, if I'm using Arc Welder, instead of these dashed lines, the slicer in a post-processing script will say, oh, well, I can just connect all these segments now. And it will literally do this and draw a nice line right back to B. So these movements are G2, G3. And what we'll look at once we get to our slicer is exactly how these get replaced. Because obviously we're not going to replace all of the straight segment movements, but we can replace many of them to get smoother extrusion and smoother movements from our motion system. So one of the other prerequisites you need to have before we can get to installing plugins is you need to have Arc support turned on in your Marlin firmware. So to turn Arc support on in your firmware, you have to go into configuration advanced.h. You're looking for the line that says define arc support with an underscore between arc and support. Turning this on is sufficient, and it will give you the G2 and G3 commands you need. Now, it's of note that if you had a smaller processor, so an original Melzi board from Creality and an Ender 3, you might run into space issues and have turned off Arc support. So if you do not have a board that has enough memory to turn Arc support on, I am sorry, but this plugin is not for you. So now that we have a definition of what arc welding is and how our slicer used to process files, let me show you how to install Arc Welder in two different scenarios. If you're like me and you love Octoprint, I'm going to show you how to install Arc Welder in Octoprint. But if you don't use Octoprint, I can still show you how to install it in Cura. So I'm going to show you how to install it in both instances and just how it works. Okay, so first we're opening Cura. Now, in Cura, you won't be shocked, but Arc Welding is actually a marketplace plugin. So we open the marketplace, Once it loads, we're going to click plugins, and then we're going to go through and look at the list of plugins and find Arc Welding. All right, so here's kind of where we're at, and you can see it lists some premium stuff at the top of Cura here, but what we really want is to just scroll down a little bit, and then here's Arc Welder. So Arc Welder, and it even tells you it converts subsequent, so those segmented lines G0, G1 to G2, G3 arcs. So we're just going to click that. We're going to click install. Now Field of View makes a lot of good marketplace add-ins for Cura. In fact, they're probably responsible for all the ones I use. So it's just letting us know that once it's installed, we need to restart Cura. So I'm going to quit Ultimaker and we're going to reboot it. Through some movie magic, we've rebooted Cura instantly, and it took no time at all. It wasn't a 10-minute wait. Now, in Cura, once you do have Arc Welder installed, we're going to bring in a model. From that model, we can slice it just like we usually would. But in your menu now, over here, if you scroll down, I'm just going to shrink a few, sorry, to the special modes. In special modes, there's Arc Welder. And when you hover over it, it tells you the exact same thing. Arc Welder converts G0, G1 to G2, G3 movements. Now, if you're not too sure what I'm talking about when I say G0, G1 or G2, G3, hang on, we're going to show you, we're going to get there. But if I were to tick Arc Welder, you can see that it'll turn the add-on on, and it gives me some options like maximum radius of an arc, which is fairly well infinite. That's a really high number. And all of these are fine to leave as default. Tolerance means how much of an arc can it go before it takes you off the segment and it'll click out of the arc. So picture our example. When we're curving, and we have that nice curve. If that curve is going to pull us more than 1 degree off of an arc, it's going to say, okay, leave the line segment. I'm not going to touch it. Resolution is fine. We won't worry about that. And then this is how many arcs, little tiny segments, it'll add into the arc in a minimum before it actually starts welding things. So again, you can go through these if you want, and I'm just hovering over them so you guys can see the options as we're going through here. So remember, hovering over gives you a full definition of exactly what happens when we're using an add-on. So takeaway, this is in special modes under Arc Welder. So let's bring a model in. So we're just going to hit File, and then we're going to open a file, which will let us import into our build plate, and we're going to bring this scientist dude in. He's one of our new favorite test prints. Now I do have the X-ray module installed, which will inspect and tell you if a model's broken. This one is a bit broken, but we're not going to worry about fixing him quite yet. Now, with this guy, if I go in here and I were to hit, I'm just going to turn off Arc Welder right now. We're going to slice it. So it's important to note that Arc Welder does not decrease the amount of time you take to print. In theory, it could, but really what it's doing is making the slicing more efficient for your printer. So right here, I'm just going to save this file, and we're going to save it just to my downloads folder. And we'll call him exactly that, MSXS4 Scientist. So it's there. Now, I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to turn on Arc Welder. I just hit the check mark, it's default settings. Let's hit slice. So nothing really looks different right now. It's slicing this model just like we would expect it to. Now, once it's done, I'm going to hit save. And we're going to save this, and we're going to call this Arc. So MSX4 Arc. Save. And you will notice, and mine did it in a window that's off center, it does open up another window while it's slicing. And while it brings up that window, it's very, very quick, and then it closes. So we're going to leave that there for right now with Cura. We're going to come back and look at those files in a second. So the next thing we're going to look at is installing this plugin inside of Octoprint. Open up Octoprint, hit the wrench, and then we're going to go down to Plugin Manager. Here, we can actually scroll down, and we're going to click the Get More. Once we go to the Get More page, we're just going to search for the word arc. And you can see here, Arc Welder is listed as well. And again, very similar in description. It says it replaces G0 and G1 with G2 and G3. So let's install that. Now this is going to spin. It's going to install. Make sure you're on the most current version because it does like to use Python 3. And we need to have the most current version of Octoprint to have that. And if you're not there yet, you should be there anyway. So once it's finished installing, like every other Octoprint plugin out there, it's going to say successful done. And then it's going to prompt you to restart. So restart now before we go to the next phase. Hey guys, so once you get that installed and rebooted, along the top in your tabs, you're going to have a new option called Arc Welder. In Arc Welder, it gives you a brief description of what it's doing. You'll notice it's almost the exact same as the Cura plugin because the same guy wrote it. If we hit Edit Settings, we can see that we have a few editable things, just like in Cura, the resolution, the arc radius, and the file processing type. We can go automatic, or we can say, wait, I want to do it manually. I like to leave it at automatic. I leave it on the first one just because manual is there. Let me show you what it does. So those settings are fine in there, but when you come to a file, let's say you've already had it on here. You can see if you hover over this two arrows pointing each other's icon, it says weld arcs. So that's the manual part. If you want to weld it, you can click weld. It says, okay, I will queue it and weld it. And it pops up and it welds the file for you. Now we're going to use our scientists that we sliced with Cura. With and without arc welding. So we're going to use the one that we sliced without arc welding on, and we're going to add it into our Octoprint, and we're going to see what happens. So upload, downloads, because that's where he is, and then we have the one that's not arced. So MSXF4, which is good, open, and it will upload. And here is this is the regular file, and you can see that Arc Welder is doing his thing. It's already grabbing the file. It's saying, what can we do to this to make it better? And poof, magic happened. And it says it's completed. It's great. It's created 33,000 arcs. It was just over, but it disappeared before I could get my mouse over it. That's fine, because here's the real magic. So the original file was 7 megabytes. And it's compressed it to 3.5. So the new file is half the size of the old file. Now, this is how it works in Octoprint. So let's take a look at the files, just the raw files that we got out of Cura. We'll compare with this. So here are our files from Cura. So these top two here. And let's just go properties on them. So this one here is 7.3, and you can see it in the side here, but this is a little bit bigger. So this was our original G code. And let's grab our properties on this one, and you can see it's 4.25. So interestingly enough, the post processor from Cura in the Arc Welder has actually found less compression than the Octoprint one. Now again, this doesn't really affect print time. It's only affecting the number of movements versus line segments and arcs that your printer will have to interpret after. So if we look at these files, we can see a bit better compression, but still it's very, very close. I wouldn't call one better or one worse. So you can see here that the estimated print time from Octoprint is 50 minutes for this AW file, aw.gcode. And then we'll look at this file and look, the estimated print time is 1.5 hours. Now, when you actually go to print them, however, the time will be very, very close. And I've done a few tests with the same files back to back, and literally it was within 7 to 10 minutes. So you are saving like a tiny amount of time, but not a whole lot. Okay, so I've opened up our Arc SX4 and our non-Arc SX4 code for the scientists. So the one that was Arc Welded and the one that wasn't. The original file is on the left, while the Arc Welded one is on the right. One thing that I would like to point out is I've sanitized this file a lot so that I could load it quickly in VS Code. I've truncated after the 10,000th line. So I've given it a lot of tail, but it was so large it was having a hard time keeping up with it. I've also deleted everything that Cura generated before this line, which actually has the settings and what actually used to slice it, and it mentions Arc Welder above it. But for this example, I just want to show you exactly what it's doing. So if we scroll down here, we can see that from line 41 and 42, we actually have an arc weld. So here's the original file using the G1 linear motion. Now you can tell it's linear, obviously, because of the G1. And well, let's see how far it goes down. So from line 41, it's compressed our movement by about 300 lines, if my memory serves me correct. Yeah, so from line 315 up is all compressed into 2 movement commands. So we can see here's an M204S 5000. So if we go back up, about 300 lines, go quick. There we are. Here is our command, G3, G3. So we've compressed over 300 lines into 2 lines. So what exactly is going on? Well, linear motion's simple. All this G1 command is telling our printer to do is move from where X was 179.46 and this Y coordinate, move it to 179.93. So that creates that straight line motion back and forth. Now it can be diagonal, right? But it's always a linear move. So it's a straight line. Where the G commands, so the G3, they're a little tiny bit different than the linear motion. So the G3 still gives an X and a Y coordinate, and those still mean the same things. However, I is an offset. So I is how far off from the X position I have to go. So that's the first curve in our arc. And then J is the offset from Y. So it's telling us we're going to move from X170 to IX21. So we're actually moving quite a bit. We're going 150 linear motions and we're compressing them into that move. So we can see just by those offset values from I and J to X and Y. So the best way to remember it is X is your first position, I is where you're ending up on the X, Y is your first position, J is where you're ending up on the Y. So the E is an interesting one. It's the amount of extrusion between the 2 points. So it lets the printer know and the extruder know how much filament to actually put out while you're going in your arc. So it's an awful lot like flow. And then we can see the F value, which again, that's just how fast you are moving. So that's the G command, G3 in a nutshell. So we're going to compare the Arc Weld from Cura and the Arc Weld from Octoprint. So here's the Arc Weld from Octoprint, has the AW, and we're going to hold shift. Actually, we have to hold control because there's a file space there. So control, highlight both, right click, and compare selected. And again, we're just going to let it grab its thing. So we can see here that we have some preamble, but this has been post-processed by Arc Welder, by Brad. So again, thank you, Brad, for writing this wonderful plugin. So let's scroll down. And what we're going to do is we're going to, again, delete all the lines on both files that say up to the generated with Cura. So we're sanitizing the top of the file. That's all we're doing. I want to compare apples to apples and see when the first change really is. So up here we can see that the arc welded version from Octoprint is the one on this side now. So that's on left. And the one with the Cura plugin is on the right. So we're going to scroll down. We can see nothing much has changed. And then boom, here is a difference. So right here we have, again, it's a different arc command, so it's showing up in a highlighted red color. So this arc command from Octoprint's plugin, which is the left side here, is working a little different than this one. And you can see even that here's our first M204S5000 is down here. And look up here. Here's our M204S5000. So the Cura version has condensed all of these arc moves more efficiently in this case, but Since the files are different, it would be easy to say that, well, perhaps, and not even perhaps, but the files have changed in a way that eventually the Octoprint plugin was able to compress it more efficiently. So I hope that makes some sense out of arc welding, how to install it first off, and then how to use it. And it's important to note that both, even in Octoprint or Cura, they're both post-processing scripts, and I imagine they're both Python. I'd have to double check the Cura one, but they're both post-processing scripts that parse your G code, change it, and then spit it out again. So the Cura one, you'll see a pop-up window after you hit slice. If you're using Arc Welder in the Pi version, it automatically reparses the file and gives you a .aw after the G code of your new file. So that way you can actually print it right from Octoprint, and it does all the parsing there. So we've explained what it is, how to use it. Should we use it? Absolutely. It's going to give you smoother prints, more efficient motion, and better extrusion just because of the way it's combining those movements. How to use it is up to you. If you're like me and you have Octoprints running on all of your printers, I would suggest using the Octoprint plugin. It's the simplest and you're not bound to use a specific slicer. If, however, you don't have Octoprint, get a copy of Cura and you can use the plugin in Cura. If you already use Cura, great. If you don't, I guess if you want to use the Arc Welder plugin right now, you're going to have to make that sacrifice. Well, I hope you learned a little bit about Arc Welder. It's a great plugin, and I think we all should be using it. If you made it this far, you are awesome. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. And did you know we have a Patreon with lots of cool behind-the-scenes stuff? Go check it out. The link's at the end of the video. Have a good one.